Sentire Media.
Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 172, The Tigress in Her Den, Caterina Sforza, Part 2.
E così ritorno su, lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
In the last episode, we followed the early life of Caterina Sforza and accompanied her as she settled in as the Lady of Forlì. We left off wondering how long the favourable situation they found there would last, and, at least as far as her husband, Count Girolamo Riario, went, it didn't last long at all. He wasted no time wheeling and dealing with a diplomatic trip to Venice and a visit to their other controlled city, Imola, and by the time he got back to Forlì, the love the city had for him had already cooled down. Indeed, it is in this period that an assassination plot, known as the Artisan Plot, was uncovered and foiled. It had been focused on bringing a member of the ex-ruling family back to power, Antonio Maria Ordelaffi, and had been encouraged by Ferrara and Florence, where Lorenzo de' Medici still sought retribution for the killing of his brother Giuliano in the Pazzi conspiracy, of which Riario had been an important part. Ferrara, on the other hand, was trying to counter the pincer move that Girolamo was trying to put on them in collaboration with Venice. It would lead to the 1482 Salt War, or War of Ferrara. You will remember that Venice, who controlled the important salt beds of Cervia, feared that Ferrara would come to dominate the salt trade thanks to their beds in Comacchio. On a side note, I really recommend a visit to Comacchio, which is like a very tiny version of Venice, and you can then go on a boat trip and see the flamingos and the eel fishing huts and the smugglers' hideouts. Venice would make some gains during said war, but not as much as they would have liked, and Ferrara survived. The end of the war would eventually be sealed by the Peace of Bagnolo. Meanwhile, Girolamo managed to appease the citizens at home by eliminating tariffs on wine and throwing a big party for the birth of their daughter, Bianca. This didn't stop the ever-present and ever-annoying Antonio Maria Ordelaffi from attempting another takeover by sending a commando by night to scale the walls and try and raise the people to his cause. The people were not really interested in his cause, and the army he had camped outside the walls was seen off by loyal troops commanded by Giovanni Tolentino. In all of this, Girolamo's attention was still continuously focused on the situation in Rome. There, the Orsini family, loyal to Girolamo and Sixtus, waged a secret underground war against the Colonna, one of the highlights being Girolamo's intervention to have Lorenzo Colonna beheaded. Caterina was staying in Rome when Pope Sixtus IV, the uncle of Girolamo Riario, died. This was quite a blow for the Count and Countess of Forlì. Not only had they lost their political support, but also the boundless sources of cash offered by the papal coffers. There would be time to think about that. For now, they needed to make the best of a bad situation. As was the case after the death of many a pope, chaos reigned in Rome, with the Colonna versus Orsini fight coming out into the open. Palazzo Colonna was attacked and sacked for all it held, including doors, windows, and pipes. With her husband outside of the city, rather than sit around and wait for him, Caterina sprung into action. 7 months pregnant, with the help of Paolo Orsini, she took the fortified Castel Sant Angelo, and then just happened to turn the cannons on the Vatican as a gentle reminder. The College of Cardinals asked her to give up the castle. She refused. Another Riario, Cardinal Raffaele Riario, was sent to ask her to come out. She refused and suggested that he come in. At this point, the cardinals went to where they knew the weak link was and managed to buy off Girolamo, who sent word to Caterina to give up the castle. She was highly annoyed, refused, and had more soldiers enter under the cover of night. In the end, Caterina had to bow to the growing pressure, which included that of her husband, and rode out of the castle on horseback, heavily pregnant, with a sword at her side. She was 21 at the time. The conclave to elect new pope could now begin. The next pope, Giovanni Battista Cibo, took the name of Innocent VIII. Where Girolamo and Caterina had before had a kindly uncle who put his full support behind his nephew, there was now an enemy. For now, however, Riario was allowed to keep his lands as agreed, thanks to Caterina's resolute stance and the protection of Milan, which also came thanks to Caterina. She could now also have her fourth child, Giovanni Livio, in relative peace. The couple now settled back into life in their little county, which included only Forlì and Imola, with the annoyingly placed Faenza between them, controlled by the Manfredi family. Girolamo's influence in Rome had evaporated, and there seemed to be no prospect of expanding his little signoria, which, due to its strategic position at the foot of the northeastern Apennines and the passes into Tuscany, looked very tasty to its big, hungry neighbours. Without the money from the papacy, managing the little state became increasingly difficult, causing increasing friction between the count and countess, who now led very separate lives. Nevertheless, they did not give in to re-establishing taxes and also managed to follow the Renaissance trend of touching up their two cities following the style of the Montefeltro of Urbino. In the same period, the couple had their fifth son, Galeazzo Maria. The boy's godfather was none other than Lorenzo the Magnificent of Florence, a choice Girolamo had had no say in. As 1495 drew on, they could no longer go on, and a tax on salt was instituted. 3 months later, yet another pro-Ordelaffi plot was uncovered, and the culprits hanged. A climate of suspicion and fear arose, which was only momentarily quieted by a bout of plague in which Caterina showed herself on the front lines with her medicinal remedies from her own personal laboratory. The bout of plague passed thanks also to heavy rains, which led to a good harvest and full bellies, which are not fertile ground for rebellious sentiment. Girolamo started in this period to suffer from bouts of some malady that modern observers had thought could have been depression, and the running of the state fell increasingly into the hands of Caterina. This included putting down yet another pro-Ordelaffi plot, and then a more serious revolt in September 1487. As well as putting down the revolt and managing the negotiations, it was up to Caterina to decide the punishments, including who would be hung, drawn, and quartered. She was 24 years old. In early 1488, a delegation of farmers was received by Girolamo and Caterina. They were complaining that they couldn't pay their taxes and no longer even owned the land they were working, as they had been forced to sell it off to rich landowners and couldn't put it up as collateral. The solution seemed simple: tax the rich landowners. How silly. Fancy asking rich people to pay their fair share. This was when things got serious. On the evening of April 14th, 1488, 3 men came to call on Riario: Ludovico Pansecco, Jacopo Ronco, and Checco Orsi. It was the latter who was admitted to see the count, who, knowing the man, greeted him. In response, Orsi stabbed Girolamo and then called upon his co-conspirators, who helped finish off the count. Riario's guards arrived too late, and after some fighting around the corpse, it was thrown out of the window, where it was mutilated by the crowd, who had meanwhile been gathered by the brother of Checco Orsi, another Ludovico. Caterina at this point allowed herself a few minutes to mourn, then very quickly composed herself and took her children, as well as her sister and mother, who, unfortunately for them, happened to be staying there, and barricaded them all up with her in a room. The conspirators eventually managed to enter and lead her out of the room and the palace. As she passed, the noisy crowd fell into an eerie silence. After she had gone, the crowd came back to life and stormed the palace, taking silver, artwork, furniture, door frames, handles, and even hinges. The plot had been a success. Count Girolamo Riario lay dead in the street, and his widow was a captive. So now the conspirators could move on to the next phase of the plan, which consisted of coming up with the next phase because they didn't have one yet. Perhaps they weren't sure they were going to get that far, or were just really bad at making plans. This time round, the plot did not centre on the previous ruling family of Forlì, the Ordelaffi, in the person of Antonio Maria, so the leaders of the plot decided to call the rightful owner of all of Romagna, at least according to him, the Pope, in the person of his papal representative, Gian Battista Savelli. You'd think that would be it. But we have another couple of characters to introduce. And one of them, who will play an important part in the coming story, is not actually a person, but a building, the fortress of Ravaldino. You can still see part of it to this day if you visit Forlì on the southernmost tip of the historical centre. In Caterina's time, you could not be said to have control of Forlì unless you also controlled Ravaldino. The fortress was controlled by a man loyal to the Riario, Tommaso Feo, and the conspirators hoped that they could get Caterina to convince him to give up the castle. To make a long story short, Caterina managed to communicate secretly with Feo, and she was let in, supposedly to discuss the terms of surrender. She slammed the door behind her and pointed the fortress's artillery on the city. She also managed to send word to her brother, the Duke of Milan, Gian Galeazzo, and the real power behind the Duke, Uncle Ludovico il Moro, to send help. It is at this point that history crosses over into legend. The conspirators, realizing they had been embarrassingly duped, brought Caterina's children in front of the castle walls, threatening to kill them if she did not give up the castle. It was at this point that, as legend would have it, Caterina lifted up her skirts, showed her lady parts, and said something along the lines of, "Ho qui lo stampo per farne degli altri. I have here the mold to make others." A pretty badass thing to say and do, and a hell of a gamble. Now, this does not actually appear in any of the contemporary local chronicles at the time, but appears later. What may have happened was that the news of what was said and done made the rounds of news channels outside of Forlì, turned into the more famous version, and then made it back to Forlì again. Whether Caterina Sforza actually did, do, and say something along those lines, the fact that her contemporaries believed she might have done so goes a long way to painting the picture of her reputation. Having failed to gain control of the fortress of Ravaldino, and with the Milanese army on the way, all the conspirators could do at this point was to leg it, disappearing into the night. Those who had supported the coup were tried and hanged, but their families were spared. Caterina Sforza showed mercy, for now. On the 30th of April, 1488, she started her term as regent of the signoria of the cities of Forlì and Imola in the name of her 9-year-old son, Count Ottaviano Riario. She was 25 years old. The Tigress was in full control. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the sketch after the credits. A History of Italy podcast is a Sentire Media production, created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and brought to you by my wonderful Patreon supporters, whom I'd like to thank, starting from the second half of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level, and they are Il Valentino, Jacob, Jeff, Jeffrey, John, Jordan, Joshua, Julia, Justin, Kyle, Laura, Old John in Milwaukee, Orlando, Kevin, Linus, Mark, Marianne, Marxist-Leninist Sicilian, Mela, and Michus Porchus. Then, of course, we can never forget the tippy-top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level, Lisa K, Andrew M, Peter W, David L, David C, JW, Sen, David A, Karen D, Peter F, Helenka K, Kaiserboss, Brigid T, Dallas R, and Joseph V. And welcome aboard to new Patreon supporter Drake B. Thank you, Drake, for your support. If, like them, you would like to have access to extra content and ad-free episodes, usually, if I can make it, a week before everybody else, you can become a Patreon supporter by going to ahistoryofitaly.com, going to the support page, and clicking through to the Patreon page. You can also just get in touch to say hello, make a comment, or ask a question. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com, or follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and good old Facebook. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. Okay, so we're agreed. You go in, convince Fail to give up the castle, and then come back and surrender yourself back to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're sure? No funny business.
How dare you suggest?
Okay, just making sure. Okay, and she's in, and the doors are closing. I'm sure that's just because it's drafty. Yeah, that's it. Castles can be very drafty, and she doesn't want to catch a cold. I'm sure that's the... Okay, so now she's turning the cannons on the city and on me. My lady?
What do you want, you monkey?
Have you convinced Fail? It's just that there's a cannon pointing at my head.
Yes, and by the end of this, I have your head and feed to my dogs.
So does that mean you're not giving up the castle?
Motherfucker.
Ah, that was a bit rude, and very sneaky, I might add.
I sneak my foot up your...
What? Now you listen here, young lady. I'm going to count to 5, and you'd better come down, or else.
Or else what, you giant steaming mound of pigs?
Or you're in trouble. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4...
2,
3... No, now stop that. 4.5, 4 3/4. Right, 5. Ha. Now, come down right now. Well, that gesture was quite uncalled for. Right, that's it. I didn't want to do this, but you're forcing my hand. Bring her children here. Caterina Sforza, I have your children here. If you don't come down right this instant, I'll...
Do what? Hang them? Cut their throats? Go ahead. Start with Ottaviano. He's lazy and whiny.
Wow, harsh. No, I shall give them a very stern scolding. And then I might even taunt them.
Do your worst. Here, look. I have what is needed to make more.
But did she... What? Did she just... Was that... Did you... My lady?
What now?
Could you repeat that?
I have here what is needed to make more.
No, I mean, like, repeat it and do the thing again. We didn't quite see, really.
No. Now go away, or shall I taunt you some more?
Okay. I don't think we're going to get into this castle.